MMA Al Dente, welcome to the fucking show. Today I'm here to talk to you about the career of Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar is famous for being a WWE wrestler at this point, and even at that point, when he came to MMA, he was famous for being a WWE wrestler. The guy was always a stud athlete. I mean, he won the NCAA championships at heavyweight, and he's a guy that can do the fucking shooting star press, which, you know, he's famous for botching against Kurt Angle at WrestleMania 20, I think. But really, Brock Lesnar, he hit most of those shooting star presses, and the fact that a heavyweight could do that is just astonishing. I'm so glad that guy went into MMA. And his career was relatively short. You know, there are, I think, 9 fights in total, and he ended up with a record of 5-3 and horse shit, against maybe he was 4-3 and horse, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, Brock Lesnar had a very good career in MMA, as short as it was. I think he made his mark. I think he's legitimately one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, and still, I'm aware of who he was as a fighter. A lot of people are quick to criticize Brock and say he couldn't handle strikes. He handled strikes well, believe me. Just not against Alistair Overeem. But he was a guy with a lot of holes in his game. I'm sure they would have been exploited left and right throughout a longer career. But he's a guy who beat elite, excellent fighters with almost no experience. So with those wins and with those losses that would have come inevitably as his holes were being closed up. But I do think he would have won a lot of great fights over many great fighters. And there's a lot of great fighters today that I look at them and say, Brock has a shot here. So Lesnar is one of the all-time greats, and I'm just going to go through his career. His first fight was against, I think, Min Soo Kim, Korean fighter, who, he was a capable fighter. If you don't believe me, go watch his fight with Don Fry. But, he was a capable fighter, but he had nothing for Brock. It's just you need to be an elite fighter, or you need to present difficult challenges physically. You need to have something to offer Brock Lesnar. You have to be a black belt everywhere, or a freak of nature yourself and a force of nature. And Min Soo Kim just didn't belong there. So Brock took him down, mounted him, and punched him a few times until I think he tapped out. It was a very uneventful debut, but still precisely what you'd like to see from a guy like Brock Lesnar. That was at K1, whatever the fuck, the Sakuraba Hoist rematch one. I think it was August of 2007. Then he signs with the UFC, and his first fight is booked against Frank Mir at UFC 81, Breaking Point. This is one of my favorite events of all time. And not only because of Frank Mir tapping out Brock Lesnar, which at the time I wanted to see, but because of the main event in which Nogueira tapped out Tim Sylvia to win the interim title. Still one of my favorite fights. But anyway, Brock Lesnar showed a lot of promise, as an MMA fighter. I believe he knocked Frank down with a straight right, and it looked like a clean, nice, sharp punch too. Short punch, but heavy. And his ground and pound, while not, I want to say, optimal and certainly not efficient, it was instinctual. You could see this guy is, this guy's going to be a problem for a lot of fighters. It wasn't the sharpest ground and pound, but it was hammer strikes to a guy that he just knocked down. He looked like he had that finishing instinct. And that was really cool to see. He couldn't get the finish, but he ended up pounding Frank Mir. Then there was a stoppage due to, the strikes to the back of the head, Mazzagatti. Because Brock hated Mazzagatti, always held a grudge against him after he stopped that fight with Frank Mir, paused it to penalize him for strikes to the back of the head. But anyway, they resumed fighting, and Frank Mir just caught him with a knee bar that was very, very rudimentary. Now, not that I'm knocking Frank Mir, but I mean, like, it only looked rudimentary because Brock didn't even have any level of defense for that. not one of the many levels. You could just tell from the beginning he's going for a knee bar, he's going for a leg. He isolated the leg. Oh, okay, Brock is down and it's hyperextended. It just looked like there was never any training with that. And if there was, which I'm sure there was, it was lost on Brock Lesnar. So that's a difficult fight. That's him coming up against, in essentially his MMA debut, but really his UFC debut with only one fight. And he's fighting a world champion. Not a current world champion at the time, but a former world champion. And specifically, look, if you were to ask me, and, you know, I did have an opinion back then in 2008, it was the worst possible matchup of them all. Even over Nogueira, who I considered above Frank Mir at that point, and overall, but still, you know, Frank would beat him a year later, or at the end of the year. Randy Couture. Randy Couture, I figured, was not an easy matchup, but a favorable matchup for Brock Lesnar. But Frank Mir was the toughest matchup for Brock Lesnar. And they did not do any favors by putting him against Frank Mir. He still showed up, fought a guy that could easily isolate a leg, and that's eventually what happened. But he attacked him. And Brock Lesnar showed real offensive prowess. You know, he showed, like I said, great instincts in addition to being built like a brick shithouse. So he takes the loss. He's 1-1, but he showed enough promise where, of course, the UFC kept him around. And then he fought Heath Herring just 6 months later. He fought Heath Herring in August, UFC 87. This was a shitty fight. Great performance from Brock Lesnar, but an overall shitty fight. Actually, this is where, in the introductions, what the fuck's his name? Dan Mirgliotta, who's still a referee. Dan Mirgliotta. He eye-poked Heath Herring. He's like, okay, come on, folks. And as he's going over the instructions, you know, don't do this, don't do that, he pokes Heath Herring in the eye. And you see Heath, like, he gouges his eye, and Heath goes down, nurses his eye a little bit. He doesn't go down, but, you know, he looks down to nurse his eye a little bit, and the fight resumes, or the fight begins. And Brock Lesnar out-wrestled Heath Herring thoroughly. He also just dominated him positionally. Heath Herring, you know, he's a guy that's a seasoned fighter. He's won by knee bar in the past, and he certainly knows how to work leg locks and everything else, which Brock, I'm sure, was more prepared for this time, 6 months later. And Heath Herring had nothing for Brock. I remember thinking, this is the perfect test for him. He didn't pass the Mir test, but Heath Herring's a guy who is not particularly great anywhere, but he's at least good everywhere. Wrestling, striking, grappling. He's good everywhere. He can win with a leg lock. He can win with a fucking armbar. He can win with a rear naked choke. And he's got heart and he's durable. I mean, you look at similar matchups, which there are a few similar matchups to Brock Lesnar, or fighters to Brock Lesnar that Heath Herring has fought. He fought Tom Erickson and Mark Kerr. Mark Kerr. I don't know why I said Kerr, but Mark Kerr, who is as close to Brock Lesnar as anybody you'll ever find in the history of MMA. And Heath Herring was being dominated by both those guys, smothered on the ground, not really taking a lot of damage, but absolutely losing positionally. And then in one moment, either an explosion or a fortuitous referee stand-up, which is only possible if you shut the guy down from hurting you. And Heath Herring had both those, you know, had an opportunity in both fights and pounced on the guy and fucking knocked him out. I think he choked out Tom Erickson, but he hurt him with, wild punches and knees and I believe a kick. And with Mark Kerr, he pounded him out with knees. He came in, hurt him with a knee, put him down, punched him, and kneed him some more. And it was a quick turnaround. It was very sudden, and it gave him two of his biggest victories in his career, both of which led to his title fight with Nogueira at Pride 17. So Heath Herring was a very dangerous fighter throughout the whole fight, and he was a good test for Brock everywhere. You know, if Brock can't take him down, he's got to strike with Heath Herring now. Heath Herring's favorite. If Brock can't, handle his jiu-jitsu, hold him down, he's going to get tapped out by Heath Herring. And Brock has to be on his game for the whole duration of the fight, because Heath Herring has shown against two very stylistically similar fighters and physically similar fighters, that he just needs one moment to excel, especially on a fatigued fighter, and he'll put him away. But Brock rode him for 15 minutes. At the end, I think he kind of humped him or some shit, I don't know, spanked him, or I don't even remember. I just remember Brock showboating, and which was cool. And Brock won a unanimous decision. Big win for Brock Lesnar. It's a fight that you'd watch and go, this isn't too impressive. I think a lot of guys could have done this to Heath if they had wrestling. No. Trust me, Brock Lesnar showed a lot more than it looked like that night. Just getting by Heath Herring over the course of 15 minutes. And it was a great win for him. That's his first real solid win in MMA. And it's in his second real solid fight in MMA. And big win for Brock Lesnar. That brought a lot for Brock Lesnar. It brought a lot to him. And it probably shouldn't have brought that much. Certainly not a title shot. There was horse shit going on with Randy. Randy was the champion for, a year at that point. Or a year and a half. And he had a contract dispute after the Gonzaga fight. And there was just a lot of horseshit going on. Nogueira, as I said, got the interim title the night Brock lost to Frank Mir. Nogueira won the interim title against Tim Sylvia. And then the interim title would be defended at UFC 92. But at UFC 91, for some reason, the regular title is on the line. And it's Brock Lesnar getting his title shot against Randy Couture. Made no fucking sense. Guy lost to Frank Mir, beat Heath Herring, got a title shot. But did it need to make sense? It made business sense. So there's that. And also, regardless of how it looked and whatever, one thing we do know is how it played out. Brock beat Randy Couture via knockout in round 2. Maybe you can call it a TKO, but it was a TKO, but he knocked him down. And man, what a big victory. Not only for the UFC title, but just for the legacy, beating Randy Couture. Randy was older. Forget at this point what he was, but he was about 42, maybe 43. He was definitely an older fighter, and he was, weathered to some extent, but I can't even really say that because he just went through a war with Gabriel Gonzaga in his previous fight, and he emerged victorious in the third round of a war, in which he broke his arm, I think, in round 2. So you can't dismiss too much of it because of his age. Not everybody beat Randy Couture after he was 40 years old. In fact, most people didn't. And Brock Lesnar got the victory. There was a lot of clinch work, a real wrestling battle, but neither guy being able to dominate. Brock got him down, but Randy fought his way back up. There wasn't a lot of top control for either fighter. And in round 2, which I think was Randy's game plan, to wear Brock down and then strike with him. And he got his wish, but he got hit in the head with what Joe Rogan called like a canned ham. A canned ham hitting you in the back of the head, which is where it hit Randy. Not in the back, but the side. And it just put Randy down. Randy went down to the floor. He wasn't completely out of it. And Brock, with that killer instinct, pounced on him. Hit him with enough hammer fists where the ref stopped it. Huge win for Brock Lesnar. He becomes the heavyweight champion. Beats Randy Couture in his 4th fight in MMA. His 3rd UFC fight. Just an incredible night. And then, oh no, that was actually afterwards. I'm thinking of UFC 100 with all the post-fight shit. That was UFC 100, which we'll get to next. But beating Randy Couture was a huge feather in his cap. Randy, at that point, he'd only been knocked out by Chuck Liddell. He was only knocked out by Chuck Liddell. You can include Josh Barnett and Rico Rodriguez, but that was ground and pound. The only guy to put him out was Chuck Liddell with a knockout on the feet, or a knockdown, as Brock got. So it was a huge win for Brock Lesnar. Might have shown the beginning of the downfall of Randy Couture, at least his chin. But Brock Lesnar showed he's a fresh young fighter in the prime of his athletic career, of his athletic prime, or whatever. The prime of his athletic prime. I don't know. Just roll with it. But he really he opened a lot of eyes that night, you know. It's one thing to knock a guy like Randy Couture out in the first round, the first minute, but to do it in the 8th or 9th minute shows that you have that. You have a lot. You have the cardio to get yourself there. And I can't say it was a losing fight. It was a winning fight for Brock, but to be in a close fight with a guy who's been in 1,000 fights and you're not going away, you know, in round 2, and you wouldn't have gone away in round 3, 4, 5, I'm sure either. It just shows you've trained a lot and you're more comfortable than you probably should be, which is what I always want to bring up with Brock. He wasn't the most comfortable in certain situations, but the guy was a fighter. He was a fighter, and great win for Brock Lesnar, beating Randy Couture. Up next, UFC 100, he fights Frank Mir in the rematch. Frank Mir at this point has gone on to beat Nogueira, and he also had another win. I don't know. I think he beat Nogueira, Brock Lesnar himself, and Anthony Hardonk after losing to Brandon Vera. So he was on like a 3-fight winning streak at this point, and of course, the win over Brock Lesnar is everything. And Brock Lesnar was, I think, an underdog in this fight. He probably should have been. I'm sure the gap was closing a little bit, but this still, to me, just seemed like a very bad matchup for Brock Lesnar. I remember thinking, of course, I saw the first fight, Brock can win, but it just, where he was more comfortable in round 2 against Randy Couture, I see him falling apart against Frank Mir if he's in that spot, especially on the ground. And of course, as we all saw, it was the complete opposite of that. They went to round 2, but it was Brock taking over the fight and smothering Frank Mir. Brock Lesnar went through, he didn't go through hell, but he went through a lot in that fight. You know, just positionally, to be comfortable stuffing Frank Mir's guard, you have to put a lot of work in. You have to do a lot of training. You can't just be some fucking blue belt, you know, which I'm sure that's what he was, but a freak athlete blue belt. You can't just be some scrub and expect to survive with Frank Mir. Brock Lesnar, not only is he offensively dangerous, of course, you know, if I'm on top of Frank Mir and I have better jiu-jitsu than Brock Lesnar, I'm still not going to be as big of a threat as Brock Lesnar, because Brock Lesnar hits with fists the size of my fucking head. So, big 80-pound Brock Lesnar at this point. He's, and the guy that's 280 pounds that he carries well. He's a very functional athlete, and he wore Frank Mir down. He showed early on he's not going to get submitted by Frank Mir, not early anyway. He was very cautious on the ground. He took him down like it was nothing. In round 2, he eats a flying knee, which I want to say it landed, and Brock just ate it. He ate it, and he attacked Frank Mir, got him to the ground, and smothered him. And in addition to smothering him, he stuffed his guard and pinned his left arm behind his back. Brock, with what you might call a seatbelt grip or whatever, all this Khabib shit, Brock trapped his arm, leaving him essentially defenseless, just sitting there with one arm, and Brock's right arm could come underneath at this great angle. And Brock started hitting him with such hard punches, which they're punches that I dismissed at first, like, oh, he's got him trapped or whatever. And then just after rewatching that fight, I don't know how many times, I'm in awe of how hard he was hitting him. He was jackhammering his face. And Frank Mir was sitting there helpless. He got smashed up. You know, there's this famous meme, Sherdog famous meme, where it's Frank Mir saying, you know, Brock Lesnar shoving his finger in Frank Mir's face. It's all bloody. It's all red. And he says, "That's what you get for eating my goddamn strawberries." Or maybe it just "Stop taking my goddamn strawberries." But either way, Frank Mir's face was smashed. Brock Lesnar gets up. He's the new champion, the defending champion, just defended his title. And he gets in Frank Mir's face, does some horse shit, goes and spits in front of the camera, some fucking, I don't know, whatever, some shit. He was like a rabid animal. And then he gets on the microphone, he says, "Coors Light, I'm going to go home and drink a Coors Light because Bud Light doesn't pay me nothing. So, and then after that, I'm going to get on my wife and ride her. Woo!" Whatever. He got real pro wrestling-y at the end there. But great win for Brock Lesnar. Avenges his loss. He's essentially perfect as an MMA fighter right now. And he took out Frank Mir, a guy who, again, I considered to be the most dangerous fighter for him, in the world at that weight class. And I put Nogueira above Frank Mir. I was like, both fights, I was like, it was a fluke. Nogueira is better than Frank Mir. But still, Frank Mir is the guy who moves on the ground like a fish. And he goes for submissions, and he's got thicker hips than Nogueira. He's a guy that's able to break limbs, whereas Nogueira is not. And it was just a great, great win for Brock Lesnar. Gets his revenge and becomes like a hit, a star. I mean, he was already a star at that point, but that was his biggest moment in the UFC. That was UFC 100, July of 2009. He would come back in July of 2010, and he would fight Shane Carwin. Shane Carwin, who at this point is the interim heavyweight champion, because in that year he beat Frank Mir for the interim title, in addition to a lot of great fighters. Gabriel Gonzaga was, I think, his second biggest win. But Shane Carwin was looking really good. Shane Carwin's a Division II wrestler. I don't know why we make the distinction. I guess because it's important. But he was a Division II wrestler, built like a brick shithouse. I mean, just, almost a clone of Brock Lesnar, although not quite. And he hit harder than Brock Lesnar. And Brock Lesnar was going up against it in this one. And, man, it was a fight for the ages. Shane Carwin hurts Brock Lesnar with an uppercut. Brock stumbles away, doesn't look comfortable. A lot of people will, say that, and I admit that. He doesn't look comfortable. He stumbles against the cage and kind of goes down as Carwin comes trying to jack him up. Carwin is landing, and Carwin had, still to this day, he might be the hardest puncher in MMA history. He might be. I don't think he is, but you poll 100 MMA fans, diehard MMA fans, he's going to win at least 20%. That's what I'd say. He's one of the top contenders. I'd say Anthony Rumble Johnson, but whatever. What do I know? And anyway, Shane Carwin hits him really fucking hard, hurts him. Like I said, swarms on him, and he can't put him away. Brock Lesnar is on the ground trying to create distance using his legs, but he's not a jiu-jitsu fighter. He's not settling into guard or anything. He's kicking him away, and he's taking a beating. I mean, this fight is about as close as a fight could ever come to being stopped without being stopped. And that's past the point at which other fights are stopped, or even most fights. So it was absolutely worthy of being stopped, but Brock wasn't quitting. He was keeping him distance, trying to survive, and eating the strikes. Brock, I think one thing that he'll never get credit for is having a really good chin. Really good chin. And he didn't have a great body, I don't want to say. Well, you know what I mean. He wasn't able to absorb strikes in his body. But his chin was, and he doesn't go unconscious. And Brock took his beating, survived, and at the very end of the round, maybe not the very end, but near the end, he got up, I believe. I believe he got up in the middle of the round. And then they clinched up, I think, and the round ended. But the round ended on a high note for Brock Lesnar. Not that he was scoring any points, but it was the fact that he wasn't getting his ass kicked. That fight was a 10-8 round, but the 10-8 action stopped for the last 20 seconds or whatever it was. Brock had seemingly, I don't want to say neutralized, but Shane Carwin was out of gas. He was neutralized at the end of that first round. I wish I could tell you what was said in between rounds in both corners, but I know Carwin was exhausted and Lesnar wasn't. They got up for round 2. Carwin's circling around. He's out of gas. I could see Brock sees, he knows he's not moving that well. And Brock fakes a punch and hits a beautiful double leg on him. Takes him down. Shane Carwin rolls over. You've seen it, I'm sure. He's trying to keep himself flat, trying to defend himself. Brock traps him in an arm triangle choke and taps him out. Fucking amazing. This was the best victory of Brock's career. The best, absolutely. I mean, you could point to the Frank Mir fight and say he did more against a more dangerous fighter, and you could dismiss the Shane Carwin fight by saying it was all about cardio and this and that and whatever. Doesn't matter. A lot went into play. You need to be rock hard. Your chin needs to be rock hard. You need to be mentally strong, and you need to have durability, but also tenacity. You need to try to win the fight when you're fatigued, when you're hurt. And Brock Lesnar did that. He didn't stop fighting. In fact, his fighting got better. He exposed Carwin's weakness, and Brock Lesnar was the one that walked away with the UFC heavyweight title. It was a really pleasant surprise. Brock Lesnar's a guy that, look, this is where, I defend all of the UFC fucking favorites. Any of the favorites. Conor McGregor, fucking Sage Northcutt, Paige Van Zandt, whatever. All these little fucking stars that the UFC goes out of their way to make. And I'm not talking about Conor, because, of course, he earned a title after 7 fights. Totally legitimately. But Sage Northcutt, no one would question Francisco Trevino, his MMA bona fides. No one would question Francisco Trevino or even Cody Pfister or fucking whoever the fuck. Nobody questions these guys. But they question Sage Northcutt. Sage Northcutt is just a guy that beat those guys. Brock Lesnar, that's my point with Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar is, whereas people might be quick to dismiss him. Oh no, he was given this title shot. Yeah, they wanted him to win. Yeah, you know what? He was given the title shot, and they wanted him to win. He still won. No one would question Shane Carwin if Shane Carwin won. Shane Carwin had to beat Gonzaga and this and that. He had an easy... No one would say any of this shit. But people are quick to say this shit about Brock. Brock Lesnar was given a title shot very quickly. It made no fucking sense. But he earned his keep in MMA history and every step of the way. Every dollar he earned and every promotion he got, so to speak, and whatever, every contract. Brock Lesnar earned it all. And this is just the highlight of his career, taking out Shane Carwin, because it's a guy who was considered the top dog in the heavyweight division. And a lot of people expected him to beat Brock. But Brock was the only guy that found a way to beat him. Frank Mir is a very versatile martial artist at the highest level. Frank Mir couldn't get past round 1 with Shane Carwin. Brock Lesnar did. And my hat goes off to Brock Lesnar. Not here, I'm too bold. But I really think Shane Carwin was his biggest victory. And still, at the end of the day, there's only 2 guys that ever beat Shane Carwin, and Brock Lesnar's one of them. So from there, we move on to 5 months later. He fights... No, 3 months later. Wow. 3 months later, he fights Cain Velasquez, whatever. And Cain takes him out. Brock Lesnar, this is where he'll tell you, he'll be the first to tell you, it was diverticulitis, which is the reason, he couldn't train well, and his body was soft, and all the rest of it. He was just really unhealthy internally. But Cain made Brock look human, and he did it with punches. It was a really good, fast-paced fight. Ended in the first round. Brock got Cain down relatively quickly, which, I don't know if there's anybody in the world that would take Brock down before Brock takes him down. Brock gets him down. Kane kicks right back up, and that was it for Brock Lesnar. After that, Kane poured it on. I think Brock had, really felt that depletion and that discouragement after Kane got up, after Brock had taken him down. This was a very difficult fight for Brock. He was hurt on the feet, stumbling around. Kane then went and took Brock down, and that was really the end of the fight. That was more of like a statement KO takedown than anything. But Cain Velasquez made a statement, and he made quick work of Brock Lesnar. Did it with strikes. Kane's one of the best to ever do it, one of the best heavyweights of all time. To be frank, I've always thought he was overrated in the all-time rankings, especially when he was champion. And, Rogan and everybody else, he's the great of all time, great cardio, whatever the fuck. And the same shit with Stipe and everybody else. My rankings are still Fedor, Nogueira, Verdum. But anyway, Kane is one of the best of all time, no doubt, even in my opinion. And no shame in losing to him. So really tough loss for Brock Lesnar. And Kane is the new champion. Kane had taken out Nogueira, I think, before this. And I don't know if he took out anybody after Nogueira, but he was climbing up there. Ben Rothwell, Nogueira, Brock Lesnar. He's the world champion. That's it for Brock's title run. That's it for his title fights in the UFC. And that's almost it for his MMA career, but not quite. He comes back a year later. Was that it? UFC 141. UFC 121 to 141. Whatever the fuck. He comes back, I think it is a year later. Year and 2 months later. Although that really doesn't make a lot of fucking sense. That there would be 20 UFC events in 1 year. Maybe it was 2 years later. Alright, comes back 2 years later. And he fights Alistair Overeem. This isn't going to fly. I got to think about this. 39. It is 1 year later. Comes back a year later, fights Alistair Overeem. This is a battle of the two He-Men. Both guys look like fucking marble sculpt. I don't know about marble. Bronze. Whatever. They're sculpted out of fucking bronze. And they're both very, they're both maxed out at 265. This is essentially a super heavyweight fight. And it was a freak show fight and enough of a draw that it would headline a pay-per-view. Lesnar versus Overeem, non-title fight. Overeem had never been in the UFC. This was his first UFC fight. He came over. He was a big deal, though. He had just won the K1 Grand Prix the year before, and he was kicking a lot of ass. And just the fact that he looked the way he did, I think, was really helped garner interest in him as a fighter, to be honest. Everybody started calling him Ubereem. And Ubereem made quick work of Brock Lesnar. He did it in the best way, though. He did it with a body shot, a knee to the body, which is Alistair Overeem's bread and butter. Going into this fight, I didn't think he would win against Kane. I was very sure Kane would beat Brock, and I thought it would play out exactly the way it did. But against Alistair Overeem, I thought it could play out exactly the way it did. But I also thought Brock has a chance here, because Overeem, he's, his chin is still susceptible to power. And Brock Lesnar, at the very least, brings power. If Brock could get him on the ground and land 5 punches straight, pretty much in any position, Brock's going to finish him. And it never got there. Overeem was just too big and strong, not for Lesnar, but for Lesnar to bully. I think Lesnar was bigger and stronger, to be honest, but Overeem was big and strong and just too dangerous on the feet. Brock had nothing for him. Overeem hit a body kick, and then the knee to the body, and Lesnar just crumbled. You could see he couldn't take it. It was immediate, too. I want to say it was a 2-minute fight, but nevertheless, that's where holes were exposed. Holes that I knew as a fan he had there. I knew this guy can't be the best striker in the world, and he can't be the best grappler in the world, submission grappling especially. But He's the greatest wrestler in the world, and he's the biggest freak in the whole business. So he's got advantages, and he's got a way to win against just about anybody. But not against Alistair Overeem. That was just a K1 striker, world champion, with a lot of deadly attacks that are unusual. Not unusual in the sense that they're not allowed in MMA or they're not common to some extent. But for somebody to be a specialist with knees, that's a very, very, very dangerous fighter for Brock Lesnar. And Brock, like I said, I still thought he could TKO Overeem, but it just never got there. Brock learned a lesson real quick. Another fight which he attributed to diverticulitis. I don't know what, I'm sure that compromised him internally, but man, Overeem landing his 290-pound fucking knees on you and your fucking ribs, that's going to do it for a lot of guys. And big win for Alistair Overeem, big loss for Brock Lesnar. That was essentially the end of his MMA career, we thought. That was December of 2011. And I want to say 4 months later, he shows up in the WWF to WWE, gives John Cena his F5, and he's been rolling in the WWE for about 10 years now. Aside from back in 2016, Brock Lesnar, who always uses the UFC in contract disputes, but he takes on Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt is a K1 champion, just like Alistair Overeem. Mark Hunt is shorter and stockier, but he's really durable, whereas Overeem's not. And he's got that extra bit of tenacity, no doubt. Mark Hunt will win in a firefight. He'll win a fight in which he's being hurt. He'll win. Whereas Overeem is more susceptible to being compromised. And he's certainly not as audacious as Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt's got a rock-solid chin, and he's got the heart the size of the octagon itself, so he can be audacious. And what we saw was Brock Lesnar winning, and this was his first fight in 5 years. I thought he was going to lose. I bet on Mark Hunt. I remember the odds were dead even, and I thought, this is a steal. Mark Hunt's going to find a way to make this guy tired, second-guess himself. He's going to put him away with strikes when he can't take him down in round 2. And I thought I was about to see that, because Brock Lesnar brought it in round 1. I think he won even the striking from the outside, just fighting so nervously and cautiously, but then took Mark Hunt down. It was a very uneventful affair altogether, but not totally uneventful when you're watching Brock Lesnar fight. Just like how Stipe and Ngannou, who fought 3 days ago at this point, that fight I thought was, it was like a pleasant surprise. It was a surprise in that it wasn't a wild fight with a violent knockout. It was relatively boring, but it was still engaging and interesting the whole way through. And that's how this fight was with Mark Hunt. Mark Hunt was out-wrestled in round 1, and then in round 2, even though he didn't really get off on Brock Lesnar, he did enough to win the round, landing nice, a few nice punches and kicks, and Brock not really doing much. It wasn't enough to make me convinced Brock was fatigued, but it was enough to make me convinced he was going to lose the fight. And instead, in round 3, Brock forced the wrestling on Mark Hunt, got him down, and effectively grappled with him. Mark Hunt is not a BJJ expert, even though he had probably better BJJ training than Brock Lesnar overall, at least more of it. Brock Lesnar was the better grappler. And Brock, I think, even tried to mount him, came close, but it was largely just top game positional dominance. Nevertheless, you look at the guys that Mark Hunt fought, and it stands out. Brock Lesnar beat him cleanly. Well, I don't know. In fact, it wasn't clean, so it was ruled a no contest, and Mark Hunt is still in litigation over that with the UFC. But anyway, at the time, it was still a great victory. Brock Lesnar won round 1, lost round 2, and won round 3, which I considered to be a big feather in his cap. Guys that are inexperienced, that lose a round, especially round 2, after winning, they don't come back from that. But Brock did. And Mark Hunt didn't have anything for his grappling. Brock was just too strong. And I know this played a role. Too tough. Brock Lesnar is tough as fuck, and his chin is rock hard. So, overall, Brock Lesnar, that's his MMA career. It wasn't the greatest career of all time, but it was a great career in which he defended his heavyweight title, twice anyway. And he, of course, he won the heavyweight title in just a few fights, which again is a lot. That's 100% due to the promotions. I don't want to say, like, oh, he won the heavyweight title quicker than anybody. Yeah, sure. And CM Punk could have beat him to the belt if he got some more favorable matchmaking, or if he beat fucking Mickey Gall. But Brock Lesnar made his mark in MMA. I think he really exceeded expectations. I think he disappointed a lot of people who just look at, the body and say, oh, look at that guy, how can he lose to anybody? But for me, as a diehard MMA fan, he exceeded my expectations on multiple occasions. Taking out Randy, taking out Frank Mir, taking out Shane Carwin. He's a guy who convinced himself that he belonged and eventually convinced everybody else. I think he's one of the greatest heavyweights of all time, and I'd love to see him come back and fight someone else. Maybe fucking Triple H. I don't know. Thanks for tuning in.